Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Today inshallah we will cover a new topic which is axilla. The axilla or the armpit. See here in this diagram, this portion is called as axilla or the armpit. This is a pyramid shaped space between the upper part of the arm. This is the upper part of the arm and the side of the chest. See here in this diagram, this is the side of the chest and this is the upper part of the arm. So this is a pyramid shaped space which is in between the upper part of the arm and the side of the chest. It forms an important passage for the nerves and blood vessels and lymph vessels as they travel from the root of the neck to the upper limb. See here, the nerves, the blood vessels and the lymph vessels, they are coming from the root of the neck towards the upper limb through the armpit or the axilla. The upper end of the axilla. First we will describe the upper end of the axilla or the apex of the axilla. It is bounded in front by the clavicle. See here, this is clavicle. Okay, this is apex of axilla or the upper end of the axilla. It is bounded in front by the clavicle, behind by the upper border or the superior border of the scapula, and medially by the outer border of the first rib. See here in this diagram, this is the outer border of the first rib. So this, the upper end of the axilla or the apex of the axilla is bounded medially by the outer border of the first rib, anteriorly by the clavicle, and posteriorly by the superior border of the scapula. These are the processes of the scapula which are visible here and they are present on the superior border of the scapula. So this is the apex of the axilla. Now the lower end or the base of the axilla, it is bounded in front by the anterior axillary fold or the anterior wall of the axilla, and it is bounded behind by the posterior axillary fold or the posterior wall of the axilla and medially by the medial wall of the axilla. So we should know that how the anterior wall, the posterior wall and the medial walls of the axilla are formed. The anterior wall of axilla, see here in this diagram, this is the anterior wall of the axilla. It is formed by major muscles which are pectoralis major muscle and pectoralis minor muscle along with the subclavius muscle. Remember, three muscles here which are forming the anterior wall of the axilla. Number 1 is pectoralis major, number 2 is pectoralis minor, and number 3 is subclavius muscle, okay, along with the clavipectoral fascia. Posterior wall or the posterior axillary fold, it is formed by three muscles which are subscapularis, teres major muscle and latissimus dorsi muscle. These muscles are present from above downwards. First of all, there will be subscapularis, then there is teres major muscle, and then there is latissimus dorsi muscle which are present on the posterior wall of the axilla. In the medial wall, it is formed by the upper thoracic wall and one muscle which is serratus anterior muscle. So these three walls, they are forming the lower end or the base of the axilla, because the base of the axilla, it is bounded anteriorly by anterior axillary fold, posteriorly by posterior axillary fold, and medially by the medial wall of the axilla. So we should know that how these anterior wall, posterior wall and medial wall, they are formed. See here in this diagram, they have shown the apex or the upper end of the axilla. Medially, it is bounded by the outer border of the first rib. Anteriorly, it is bounded by the clavicle, and posteriorly, it is bounded by the superior border of the scapula. See here, this is the superior border of the scapula. We have anterior wall of the axilla, we have lateral wall of the axilla, medial wall of the axilla, and we have the posterior wall of the axilla along with the apex of the axilla and the base of the axilla. Apex is also called as the inlet of the axilla, and base or floor is also called as the outlet of the low or the lower end of the axilla. Now we will discuss the walls of the axilla one by one. First of all, I have told earlier also the anterior wall of the axilla. It is formed by the pectoralis major muscle, pectoralis minor muscle and the subclavius muscle. Remember, three muscles for the anterior wall of the axilla. Then the posterior wall of the axilla, they are formed by three muscles, the subscapularis muscle, latissimus dorsi and teres major muscle from above downwards. Then medial wall by the upper four or five ribs. Remember, upper four or five ribs and the intercostal space is covered by the serratus anterior muscle. Okay, the serratus anterior muscle is attached to the upper 8 ribs, but upper 4 or 5 ribs are included, which are forming the medial wall of the axilla. Then the lateral wall of the axilla, it is formed by two muscles which are coracobrachialis and biceps brachii muscle, which are present in the bicipital groove of the humerus. Bicipital groove of the humerus is the intertubercular sulcus of the humerus, which is forming the lateral wall of the axilla. So we have discussed in this slide the anterior wall of the axilla, the posterior wall of the axilla, the medial wall of the axilla and the lateral wall of the axilla. See here in this diagram, they have shown the base of the axilla. See here, they have shown the base, which is fourth or fifth rib, medially, which is bounded by fourth or fifth rib, and it is covered by serratus anterior muscle. Anteriorly, we have pectoralis major muscle. This is pectoralis major. Laterally, we have a bicipital groove of the humerus, which is having two muscles, which are coracobrachialis and biceps brachii muscle. And posteriorly, we have three muscles, which are subscapularis. See here, this is subscapularis muscle. Then there is teres major muscle and latissimus dorsi muscle. These muscles are present from above down. They are three muscles: subscapularis, teres major muscle and latissimus dorsi muscle. They are forming the posterior wall of the axilla. In this diagram, you can see some of the nerves which are present here, which are coming from the root of the neck and coming towards the upper limb. See here, this is axilla. Okay, this is the medial wall of the axilla, which is covered by the serratus anterior muscle. This is serratus anterior muscle. Okay, this is the posterior wall of the axilla, having three muscles: subscapularis. This is subscapularis muscle. Then this is teres major muscle, and this is latissimus dorsi muscle. So these are three muscles which are forming the posterior wall of the axilla. This is anterior wall of the axilla, which is formed by the pectoralis major muscle. When we will remove the pectoralis major, we can see the pectoralis minor muscle. Okay, so this is pectoralis major muscle forming the anterior wall of the axilla. This is serratus anterior, which is forming the medial wall of the axilla. And these are three muscles which are forming the posterior wall of the axilla, which are subscapularis, teres major muscle and latissimus dorsi muscle. In this diagram also, you can see the posterior wall of the axilla. These are three muscles which are forming the posterior wall. This is subscapularis, which is attached to the subscapular fossa of the scapula. Then there is teres major muscle. See here, this is teres major, and then latissimus dorsi muscle. These are three muscles which are forming the posterior wall of the axilla. This is the anterior wall of the axilla. See here, the pectoralis major muscle, the subclavius muscle and the pectoralis minor muscle along with the clavipectoral fascia. First of all, the anterior wall is bounded above by the pectoralis major muscle, and when we will remove the pectoralis major, we can see the subclavius, the clavipectoral fascia and the pectoralis minor muscle. They all are forming the anterior wall of the axilla. This is the medial wall of the axilla, upper 4 or 5 ribs along with the serratus anterior muscle, which is forming the medial wall of the axilla. And this is the lateral wall of the axilla, which is showing the intertubercular sulcus or the bicipital groove of the humerus, on which two muscles are attached, which are biceps brachii and coracobrachialis muscle. So this is the lateral wall of the axilla. In this diagram also, you can see the medial wall, the apex of the axilla, the lateral wall, the anterior wall, there is posterior wall also, and then this is the base of the axilla. In this diagram, they have shown the medial wall of the axilla. See here, these are upper 4 or 5 ribs along with the intercostal spaces which are present in between the ribs, and this is serratus anterior muscle which is attached to the outer border of the upper 8 ribs. But upper 4 or 5 ribs along with their intercostal muscles and intercostal spaces, they are forming the medial wall of the axilla. In this diagram also you can see all walls. This is medial wall. I am explaining again and again all the walls of the axilla. This is medial wall which is having 4 or 5 ribs along with the serratus anterior muscle. This is anterior wall which is formed by the pectoralis major muscle, pectoralis minor muscle and the subclavius muscle. And this is lateral wall which is showing the intertubercular sulcus, the biceps brachii muscle and the coracobrachialis muscle. This is posterior wall of the axilla which is having 3 muscles, out of which one muscle is shown here which is teres major muscle. Along with the teres major muscle, subscapularis and latissimus dorsi are also forming the posterior wall of the axilla. See here, this is also showing the apex of the axilla, the base of the axilla and all other walls of the axilla. In this diagram also, they have shown the contents of axilla now. See here, what are the contents of axilla, okay, which are bounded by all of these walls, okay. These are the contents of axilla which are axillary artery and its branches, axillary vein and its tributaries, cords of the brachial plexus are present here, okay, and lymph vessels are also present here. So we will discuss the contents of axilla now. Number 1, axillary artery and its branches which supply blood to the upper limb, axillary vein and its tributaries which drain the blood from the upper limb, lymph vessels and lymph nodes which drain the lymph from the upper limb and the breast and from the skin of the trunk down as far as the level of the umbilicus, and brachial plexus which innervates the upper limb. These structures are embedded in fat. This is the most important question which is asked in exam. In exam, this presentation or this topic is very important, and it is asked again and again that what are the structures which are forming the walls of the axilla and what are the contents of axilla. So content number 1 is axillary artery. Can you see here in this diagram, this is axillary artery which is the first content of axilla. The axillary artery begins at the lateral border of the first rib. See here in this diagram, this is the lateral border of the first rib. From here the axillary artery will start. It starts as a continuation of the subclavian artery. Remember, these questions are asked in the exam again and again. The axillary artery is the continuation of the subclavian artery. It is not the branch of the subclavian artery. It is actually the continuation. When the subclavian artery reaches the outer border of the first rib, it begins the it is converted into the axillary artery. Okay. And it ends at the lower border of the teres major muscle. See here, this is teres major muscle and this is the lower border of the teres major muscle. Up till here the axillary artery continues, and from this point the axillary artery will be continued as brachial artery. So it is the same artery which is formed and which is first subclavian artery, then from the outer border of the first rib till the lower border of the teres major muscle, it is axillary artery, and then it will be continued as brachial artery. These 3 arteries are very important. You should learn that from where the axillary artery starts and where it ends. So it starts at the outer border of the first rib and it ends at the lower border of the teres major muscle, not the upper border. It is the lower border of the teres major muscle at which the axillary artery ends, and it continues as the brachial artery. Now, how many parts of axillary artery are there? There are 3 parts of the axillary artery. See here, this is the first part of the axillary artery. Then there is one muscle which is pectoralis minor muscle which divides the axillary artery into 3 parts. See here, this is pectoralis minor muscle which is dividing the whole axillary artery into 3 parts. So this is the first part of the axillary artery that extends from the lateral border of the first rib to the upper border of the pectoralis minor muscle, a very small part. See here, this is the small part of the axillary artery, which is the first part. It starts from the outer border of the first rib and it will end at the upper border of the pectoralis minor muscle. Then there is the second part of the axillary artery which lies behind the pectoralis minor muscle. This is the second part of the axillary artery. And the third part of the axillary artery which extends from the lower border of the pectoralis minor muscle till the lower border of the teres major muscle. So this is a long part of the axillary artery which is the third part, and it starts from the lower border of the pectoralis minor muscle up till the lower border of the teres major muscle. So this is the pectoralis minor muscle which divides the axillary artery into three parts: the first part of the axillary artery, the second part of the axillary artery, and the third part of the axillary artery. Now, the branches of the axillary artery, remember one point, that the first part of the axillary artery will give one branch, second part of the axillary artery will give two branches, and the third part of the axillary artery will give three branches. So, first part, one branch, second part, two branches, third part, three branches. So, first of all, the branch of the first part of the axillary artery, there is only one branch which is called as highest thoracic artery. See here, I am moving my cursor on the highest thoracic artery. This is highest thoracic artery, which is only branch of the first part of the axillary artery. Now the second part of the axillary artery will give two branches. Number one is thoracoacromial artery. Can you see here? This is thoracoacromial artery, which will give many branches. The deltoid branch, brachial branch, many other branches are there which are coming from the thoracoacromial artery and the lateral thoracic. Can you see here? This is lateral thoracic artery which is also coming out from the second part of the axillary artery. So second part will give two branches, thoracoacromial artery and lateral thoracic artery. Then the third branch of the axillary artery will give three branches. Number one is subscapular artery. See here, this is subscapular artery, and there is anterior circumflex humeral artery and posterior circumflex humeral artery. Anterior circumflex, which is winding around the anterior border of the humerus, and posterior circumflex humeral means which is winding from behind the humerus. So this is called as posterior circumflex humeral artery, and anterior circumflex humeral artery which is winding anteriorly. So these are three branches of the third part of the axillary artery. Again, I will explain the names. Number one is highest thoracic artery from the first part of the axillary artery, then the thoracoacromial artery and lateral thoracic artery from the second part of the axillary artery, and subscapular artery and anterior circumflex humeral and posterior circumflex humeral from the third part of the axillary artery. This is the most important question which is asked in exam, that write the names of the branches of the axillary artery. From the first part, one branch; from the second part, two branches; from the third part, three branches. See here in this diagram, this is subclavian artery. At the outer border of the first rib, this will become axillary artery. This axillary artery will come from the outer border of the first rib till the lower border of the teres major muscle. This is the lower border of the teres major muscle. Then it will become the brachial artery. This axillary artery is divided into three parts by the pectoralis minor muscle. The part which is above the pectoralis minor is first part. The part which is behind the pectoralis minor is second part, and part which is below the pectoralis minor up till the lower border of the teres major muscle is the third part of the axillary artery. So this diagram is very important for understanding the parts of the axillary artery. See here in this they have shown the branches of the axillary artery. This is the first part of the axillary artery which is giving one branch which is named as highest thoracic artery or superior thoracic artery. They are same. Highest thoracic or superior thoracic artery are same. Then the second part of the axillary artery which is behind the pectoralis minor muscle is giving two branches. One is thoracoacromial artery. This is thoracoacromial, and one is lateral thoracic artery. See here, this is lateral thoracic artery which is a branch of the second second part of the axillary artery. Then the third part of the axillary artery is giving three branches. This is subscapular artery, this is anterior circumflex humeral, and there is posterior circumflex humeral, which is going behind the humerus. So these are the three branches of the third part of the axillary artery. Again, this is axillary artery, first part, then second part, and then third part. Okay, it will become brachial artery where it continues at the lower border of the teres major muscle. Again, in this diagram, they have shown all branches of the axillary artery. First branch will give one branch, the second part will give two branches, and the third part will give three branches. So this diagram is also very important. Now the axillary vein. This is the second content of the axilla. The axillary vein is formed at the lower border of the teres major muscle. Where the axillary artery was ending, here the axillary vein will start. Okay, at the lower border of the teres major muscle by the union of the veiny comitants of the brachial artery. See here all the paired brachial veins along with the basalic vein. This is basalic vein along with all brachial veins or the veiny comitants of all the branches of the axillary artery. They will form, along with the basalic vein, they will form the axillary vein. See here, this is axillary vein. Okay, this axillary vein, it runs upward on the medial side of the axillary artery. See here in this diagram, it is very clear that axillary vein is present medial to the axillary artery, and it ends at the lower border of the first rib. This is the lower border or the outer border of the first rib by becoming the subclavian vein. So it is very, very important how the axillary vein is formed. It is formed by the paired brachial veins and all the veiny comitants of the brachial artery and the basalic vein. See here, this is basalic vein. Okay, and it will end up till the lateral border of the first rib, and it will be converted or it continues as the subclavian vein, or it drains into the subclavian vein. The veins also receive the tributaries which correspond to the branches of the axillary artery and the cephalic vein. See here, this is cephalic vein. It is also draining in the axillary vein, and all the branches of the brachial artery will have the tributaries of the all the branches of the axillary artery will have the same tributaries of the axillary vein, such as the superior thoracic vein, the lateral thoracic vein, the thoracoacromial vein, anterior circumflex humeral vein, posterior circumflex humeral vein, okay, and the subscapular vein. These all veins will drain in the axillary vein along with the cephalic vein. So you have to remember the tributaries of the axillary vein. Again, I will repeat the axillary vein. It is formed by the union of two veins. Number one, paired brachial vein. Number two, basalic vein. There are many tributaries of the axillary vein. Number one is cephalic vein. Number two, superior thoracic vein. Number 3, lateral thoracic vein. Number 4, thoracoacromial vein. Number 5, anterior circumflex humeral vein. Number 6, posterior circumflex humeral vein. And number 7 is subscapular vein. Okay, they will drain in the axillary vein. This axillary vein will continue as the subclavian vein at the lateral border of the first rib. Okay, so you have to remember how the axillary vein is formed, what are the tributaries of the axillary vein, and how it continues. It continues as the subclavian vein. See here in this diagram also, this is axillary vein. It is formed by the union of the basalic vein and the paired brachial veins. Okay, they will come here. Then the cephalic vein and all tributaries which are of same name as the branches of the axillary artery, they will drain in the axillary vein. This axillary vein will continues as the subclavian vein. So this was the lecture about the axilla. I hope you understand. Thank you very much.